Hey everybody, this is Dream. I will get this up and running shortly. We will be breaking down the main slate for Major League Baseball. Alright. Let me get this up here and then we'll get talking about it. Hopefully this will be a pretty good slate tonight. It's got quite a few games, but it should be a very interesting one. Let's see here. Just a moment. Alright, so we are going to be breaking down this 8-game slate. Obviously, we don't have all the lineups yet, as this slate does go pretty late, so that is a little bit of a concern today, but overall, we can still do pretty good here with our potentials today. I am also watching the Braves Phillies right now, and it's still 0-0. It's pretty surprising, but Strider's been pretty good, so let's go ahead and get into this slate here. Let me first pull up the weather for today. Let's see here what we got. Yeah, MLB weather. All right. So the biggest question mark here is going to be the Cleveland-Oakland game. I'm leaning to the fact that it's probably not going to happen because it looks like there's a ton of weather that might taper off late. Uh, they may have to delay quite a bit uh, in order to get this game in today, but I honestly don't know that they will. I think they'll probably just wait for tomorrow, but even then, squeezing it in tomorrow could be tough as well. So I'm not sure exactly what they're going to do yet, but that is one of the later games, so that is going to be somewhat annoying for a fantasy perspective. The other game that has some weather concern is St. Louis and the LA Dodgers, but it looks like they should be able to get this game in, so I'm not too concerned about that, and the pitching is not a big concern there anyway, so I think that's fine. But with the Cleveland-Oakland game, obviously we have the one concern with Allen, who looks like a pretty solid pitcher for the slate, considering the matchup and his upside. So we'll just have to wait and see what we've got fantasy-wise later uh, for other teams. But it does look like that Cleveland-Oakland game is probably the one that I'm guessing won't play today, if anything. And so I'm going to probably steer clear of that for the most part. But I will break them down a little bit just in case it does end up playing here. But let's go ahead and get started with our pitchers today. Now, we have basically 7 pitchers that we do like, and 5 of them, or 4 of them, are really good plays, and then 3 are kind of contrarian plays. So we will start with, let's see, oh crap. We will start with our uh, top pitchers here. One being George Kirby. Now, Kirby is the top overall pitcher on the slate, price wise, and his upside potential. I do like his metrics for this game. I think that he's got a favorable matchup here against Seattle and, against Boston, rather. Uh, Boston does have some bats that are good, but he's one of the safer plays on the slate as he has the biggest strikeout upside. I think he should be able to get 6 or 7 strikeouts in this one, and that gives him a lot of potential today. Also like the fact that he is one of the more favorable ones to get a win on the slate, and a quality start as well. However, he definitely carries some risk as he is the most expensive option, and I don't think he'll go quite as deep as some of the other options on the slate, but he definitely has good potential for the strikeouts, and that will help us pay off today. With that said, his value is not perfect because he is the most expensive option on the slate. But if we look at other pitchers here, we're going to look at Kelly for Arizona. Now, he faces a great matchup here against Colorado, and he might be my favorite pitcher at this point just because he has really good potential here. He's got the most upside of any pitcher on the slate with this matchup. He doesn't have the strikeout stuff that Kirby and Pivetta have, but at least the potential for it. But he does have good stuff, and he has good metrics for this game. I think this is going to be a game that he's going to dominate. And if we look back and we look at his past stats in 3 games last season against Colorado, he did very well. I did mention that in the early video, and so he's going to be somebody that I'm going to try to roster today, as he had 38, 27, and 21 fantasy points against Colorado last season. He's a great alternative to George Kirby, and he's a few $100s cheaper, with just as much upside or even more, and a better matchup in general. Then we're going to get into some more of a value play kind of situation here with Nick Pivetta. Now, Pivetta is at $8,100 for Boston, but he does carry a good matchup metric here against Seattle, who he did pretty well against last season. One game for 27.5 fantasy points, and another one where he had 14 fantasy points. He's not a must play, but he's definitely a good value play on this one, him and a couple others. He's probably my favorite value play, just simply because he's got a good matchup fantasy wise, and he has a decent strikeout potential here. He's probably third on this slate and total strikeouts likely, and that gives me a lot of upside for this matchup. So I think he's somebody that I do like quite a bit. Right now, I am leaning towards using Pivetta and Kelly, but I'm also looking at a couple other guys, and obviously that Cleveland game could come up, and his strikeout potential, which is pretty good for this one. Not as high as the top 3 guys, but he's fourth best, right around the same as Puck. And that gives me some idea that he's going to be a solid option on the slate. And I do like his pitching metrics, as well as his potential to get the win, as he's a very favorable matchup. And Cleveland's also a team, from a batting perspective, that we could stack. And so that does give us some upside from him as well. However, this game does have weather concerns, so do keep that in mind. Looking at Puck, though, for Miami, he's somebody that I think is going to be high owned, but he definitely carries a lot of risk because he hasn't really played as a starter before in Major League Baseball, though his metrics are very solid, and he has a good value price point here. And he's facing Pittsburgh, who's not very good either, and he also has a pretty good strikeout potential here. So he's definitely somebody I would consider, but he definitely carries kind of a GPP status for me right now. I think some people are thinking he looks like a core play, so I do understand that from that perspective. But he's of the guys I've mentioned so far, he's got the lowest shot of getting the win and quality starts, as he's got the most risk there. And I don't know that his pitch count will go as high as some of the other guys, and so that is a little bit of a concern. But he definitely has that strikeout upside, and he actually is probably leading the slate on potential earned runs against. So that definitely gives a boost. The question is, can he go over 5 innings and get that potentially get a win here as well? Then we have 2 guys that I think are kind of GPP only plays, and that's Carlos Rodon first for the Yankees against Houston. Obviously, Houston is a good team, and so he's going to be a very Hail Mary GPP type of play, but he should have some ownership, especially on those higher end GPPs, so I think he's a viable option. And then Harrison for the Giants is also interesting today, as he has some good metrics for this game and a favorable matchup from a pitching perspective, but he definitely carries some risk. He's not got the highest ceiling as anybody. Like I said, he's squarely a GPP play today, but he has a pretty low ownership aspect here. So, but his strikeout stuff is not particularly great, and so he's very, very risky. But I do think that if he has a solid day, then he would be in the position to be a good value play on the slate. So then we're going to start looking at at these games here. We're just going to go like team to team and kind of break it down, and kind of give you what I think about their lineups and how to the stackability and stuff like that. I do want to mention, though, I do have some my top stacks are Arizona, Houston, the Yankees, Miami, Toronto, and Cleveland. Kind of in that order. I do think that Arizona is definitely going to be a favorable team tonight after what they did yesterday. They absolutely, murdered the ball. So with that 14-run inning, which was pretty amazing, I think that they're going to have a lot of potential again today, on this particular slate, especially. So let's go ahead and look into our first teams here. First, we're going to look at Toronto. For our hitters. Now, we actually do already have their lineup, which is nice. but we won't have many of these teams' lineups here pretty soon. But anyway, for Toronto first, we do have a pretty interesting lineup here. As for the matchup against Tampa Bay, I do think that they're going to have some potential stackability here. Um, let's see, they're facing Savell, and he has not been very good against Toronto in the past. I do like their upside, though they are pricey today. It looks like Vlad Jr., Springer, and Bo Bichette are probably the top options, along with Varsho and Justin Turner. Um, I don't even hate the Kirk at catcher a little bit. Um, he definitely has some utility here, but they don't have super high ownership or anything, so this is definitely a contrarian stack, if you will. Looking at the metrics here, from a home run perspective, Vlad Jr. definitely has the most upside from just getting on base and doing things. Let's see what we like there. Probably Springer and Bichette have the best upside there. And then just the general, like, how good can they potentially be? Kiermaier at the bottom of the lineup does have some utility, but there's not a whole lot to like at the low end of the lineup. I think top end, like the top, see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 stack is probably the best way to go if you were to stack Toronto on this particular slate. Looking at Tampa Bay, we have some guys that have some pretty good ownership today, but not a whole lot either. This is another situation that isn't particularly great, but it's okay. Tampa Bay is facing against Chris Bassett, who's actually pretty good, and it did okay in one game against Tampa Bay last season, so they definitely carry a little bit of risk. My favorite play from the team is Lowe. I don't really think that stacking this team is all that useful on this one, but he definitely has, but Lowe definitely has that home run potential on the slate. Uh, the strikeout rate for him is a little bit concerning, but the home run upside there for him. I don't really love anybody else on this team, outside of maybe trying to Caballero as a stealing base potential guy at the bottom of the lineup. Sorry, that's Caballero. Where is he? Uh, Caballero might be a good guy at the bottom of the lineup where he could potentially get a stolen base if he can get on base and do something, but he definitely carries some risk here. So he's not a must play by any stretch of imagination, and he doesn't have a lot of usage or ownership on the slate in general. So I don't really think Tampa Bay is a team I'm going to be too interested in, but they definitely have a couple guys that have that upside. Then let's look at Pittsburgh here. Pittsburgh, we also have their lineup in, which is nice, so that definitely helps us a little bit. Uh, so they are facing AJ Puck here, and while I do like Puck as a kind of a risky GPP play, I don't think that there's too much on this team that's going to have a lot of upside, but we do have a couple guys that have some home run or bust type of situations, and that would be kind of a McCutcheon and Hayes and even Reynolds. But I do think that we have not much else there. We do have some guys that look like they should be able to get some hits, though. I do think that Hayes and Reynolds and even Connor Joe have some utility. That's for the back of the lineup. I mean, obviously, O'Neill Cruz can have that home run or bust situation, but he doesn't have the great metrics today. Uh, Triolo has some utility as well, but I think they're pretty avoidable as a team in general as in this one. Looking at Miami here, we are going to uh, look at Miami a little bit closer here because they are going up against Perez, who's not a great pitcher, and this is going to give some ownership opportunity for this team and a very nice little 1, 2, 3, 4 stack on this game. But even the back of the lineup has some stackability and has some ownership upside. Obviously, Berger and Bell are going to have a lot of potential in this one. I do like both these guys to be top of their stack, with Arraez and De La Cruz both having kind of secondary opportunity in a stack like that. But you could even go a 2, 3, 6, 7 stack along with Betancourt as a catcher, with Anderson and Evisel Garcia, as they both have some utility on the slate. Even the back of the lineup looks not terrible today. But for home run purposes, Jake Berger is clear cut option. He's got a lot of home run potential here. The best guy for stolen bases from the team is Chisholm, and while he does have some upside, he definitely carries some risk today, as he doesn't have a lot of hitting upside. I do think that Bell is probably my favorite hitter for the game, and because he's got the best opportunity for hits and not striking out too much. But Arias and Berger both have really good utility here as well. So I think a stack of at least Berger, Bell, and Arias is definitely one way you can go today on the slate. Looking at the Yankees, we have an interesting matchup here for Yankees and Houston. Now we still don't have their lineup yet, but for the Yankees, they are facing Javier, who is a pretty good pitcher, but we're still going to see some upside for Aaron Judge and Gleyber Torres and even Volpe in the backer part of the lineup, likely. But this team definitely carries some risk as they are pretty pricey, and so it's probably not a team that I'm going to have a lot of invested in because they're going up a decent pitcher, but not a great one, and then a decent situation here in general. From a home run perspective, obviously Judge has massive home run upside. Stanton does too, as does Soto, but they all strike out quite a bit, so that is a concern here, especially Judge and Stanton. Torres actually looks like one of the better hitters on the team, and so if you wanted to stack them up, well, it's going to be very difficult to do. You could definitely go with Soto, Judge, Torres, and Stanton. Um, and then even Volpe has some utility on the back end of this slate here. But again, not something I super love. Looking at Houston, though, I do like a Houston stack today. They should be a popular stack, with the exception of the fact if you use Carlos Rodon, who is a GPP only play, that would definitely be some way to go. Now we do have Houston's lineup here, so that does give us some advantages. Alvarez and Altuve and Tucker are basically the top of the stack, along with Bregman and McCormick. But Abreu also has some home run upside today, and even Diaz has some upside on the slate. This team is stacked top to bottom, so there's not a whole lot of strikeouts happening either, and they all have really good hit rates, with the exception of maybe Myers. He's probably the only guy that I don't like from the team, quite frankly, for this particular slate. Maybe Pena is a little bit avoidable as well, but you could pretty much stack this team up in a lot of different ways and find good potential here. So looking at San Francisco sorry, not San Francisco, Colorado and Arizona. Now this is an interesting game as Colorado is going to have a very ugly time here against Arizona's pitching, and they are just very avoidable on the slate. I don't really like anybody, with the exception of maybe Jones at the top, but he definitely carries a lot of risk, and I don't think he's going to be very popular fantasy-wise. The ownership here is also very low, and that's going to keep it, you know, pretty limited fantasy-wise as well, especially with the top-tier pitching against them. I do expect a couple of these guys to have a lot of strikeouts, at least 2 or 3 strikeouts in this one, and it's just an avoidable team. Nolan Jones is the only guy that really has any stolen base upside or home run upside in this game right now, so that's definitely an avoidable team. Looking at Arizona, I do like Arizona quite a bit today. I think they're going to score a lot of runs. Right now, I think they're the highest on the total at 4.9 runs, or maybe the Dodgers a little bit higher, but they are definitely up there with Houston and the Dodgers. So they are going to be a very popular team today to stack up, and for good reason. They did a lot yesterday. Now their pricing is pretty good today. Actually, it's not terrible. I mean, they've got several guys in the $5,000 range, and Corbin Carroll's already super expensive. But they're definitely going to be a team once we see their lineup too that will help us. But I do think their top 4 guys, which are typically 1, 2, 3, and 4, which are Carroll, Marte, Gurriel Jr., and Walker, are all going to be very viable options on the slate. I think Walker's probably the weakest of them because of his price. And then even Moriano at catcher, assuming he's a starter today, he's going to have a lot of potential in this one as he's got really good metrics for this game, and I do like his value price and things like that. If we look at the general metrics, though, I don't necessarily think there's going to be a team that's going to match a bunch of home runs, but I do think Marte has the best upside for that, and I do think Corbin Carroll has the best upside for stolen bases. And then generally speaking, I think all these guys are not striking out much from those top 5 at least. And so a stack of Carroll, Marte, Gurriel Jr., Walker, and Moreno is definitely something you could do, and it wouldn't cost you as much as you think a stack like that would cost you based on what their potential is. So I'm not sure that the back of the lineup looks all that great today, but we can definitely start with those guys as viable options on the slate. Looking at Boston and Seattle, we will look at Boston first. Boston does face a pretty tough uh, matchup here in George Kirby, and so they do have some. They are pretty avoidable on the slate. If you wanted a one-off, you could look at Devers or Duran as they started the season pretty solid, and they have some upside, but they definitely carry some risk. Obviously, Devers has that home run upside, which we like, and so he's definitely somebody to consider, but he definitely carries some risk today. As for strikeouts, a lot of these guys are striking out a lot. In fact, there's not one guy on this team that's projected to start isn't expected to strike out at least once today, except for Yoshida. So I think that this is a team that you can definitely go up against from a uh, pitching wise, but it's also a team that can get some home runs at the same time. Moving on to Seattle here, this is a team I do actually like today some, as they're facing Pavetta. Uh, but I do not. Sorry, I mean I do not like as they are facing Pavetta, and I think Pavetta is going to have some upside today. And this team is going to be pretty low owned. The only guy that's super concerning really is Rodriguez in the two spot likely, as he has got nice home run upside. Even though Polanco and Raleigh both and Will Garver too both have home run potential, I do think that their strikeout rates are pretty bad, and so I think they're going to have some issue there. Um, I just don't see this team doing too much in this game, even though they do have a decent total at 4.2 points or 4.2 runs. I do think that they're going to be a team to somewhat avoid on this particular slate. Looking at San Francisco, this is a game that I do want to target some guys in. San Francisco is going up against Joe Musgrove. Now, Musgrove is a decent pitcher, and he definitely carries. They definitely carry some risk here. But a couple of these guys actually have some utility, and Solar is being one of them, and then Chapman as the other, and also Wade. Though they are contrarian plays only, Wade is a good value, but they are contrarian plays. They don't have a whole lot of home run upside other than Solar, but they do have some good hitting metrics here, and some of these guys are not striking out too bad, like Wade, especially in Estrada, and so there's definitely a team that you could find a contrarian way to utilize them, but they're definitely going to carry some risk on the slate. Looking at San Diego for a team that I do like to target today. They have 4.5 run total, and I think they're going to be a popular stack, even though they're going up against Kyle Harrison, which is a kind of a GPP contrarian play. This team is full of guys that can get hits, and so they are stackable on the slate, but mostly just Tatis and Machado and maybe Kem, and then maybe Compensano, and then Azakar at the bottom of the lineup potentially. But as for the home run upside here, I do like Tatis Jr. for a home run, but he's definitely risky. He also has stolen base potential. He is striking out a little bit too much, but he definitely has a good opportunity to get on base in this one, and so he's definitely worth a look. This team I think is going to be okay, but they're going to be hard to stack because of their prices and things like that. I'm going to skip the Cleveland Oakland game for a minute, and I'll come right back to it. I'm going to start with the St. Louis and Dodger game here. For St. Louis, they are facing Bobby Miller here, who is a guy that has potential to be good. However, he hasn't been consistent yet in his career, so we'll have to see how he does here. But I do think that the St. Louis is pretty avoidable, especially the back of the lineup looks absolutely awful. I mean, I look at the bottom, 4 or 5 guys, and I'm just like, what are we doing outside of Contreras, basically, and Goldschmidt and Arenado? It's a really rough lineup for them, especially the bottom half. So I think this team is pretty avoidable, even if their couple guys at the top do okay today, which Gorman definitely has that potential. He's got the highest upside per home run on the slate. But this team seems pretty avoidable, and there's a decent amount of strikeouts that could happen there. I do think Donovan has the best chance of getting some hits, but I don't think that they're super liked on the slate, except for the Dodgers. They're going to have a high total on this one. For the Dodgers here, they are facing Zach Thompson, who has one of the worst ERA potentials on this entire slate. And so I think the Dodgers are definitely a stackable team. Yesterday they were a stackable team, and I look for them to be stackable again. Mookie Betts, Otani, Freeman, uh, Will Smith, all in play here. Chris Taylor at the bottom, probably, assuming he starts at shortstop, he will have some utility here in probably the 7th or 8th spot. And even if we get down to Lux and Kiki Hernandez, they will have some utility as well. I think Muncy and Toscar are probably a little bit more avoidable today, but they do draw some potential. There just seems like a little bit overpriced for what their possible upside is. But this team is definitely stackable, and there's a lot of different ways you can do it. But Otani obviously has the biggest upside of anybody on this team. If we look at the home run metrics, Mookie Betts and Otani both have the best upside there, but Max Muncy has some pretty good upside as well. The problem with Muncy really is the strikeouts sometimes, and so as I do think that he has some good metrics here, but they definitely carry some risk. I do like Chris Taylor as a contrarian play. He doesn't have the big home run rate and is a little bit too strikeout friendly, but he has a good hit rate as today as well, and so does Mookie Betts. So I think this team is very viable, and it should be a fun team to roster if you can find a way to roster them. Obviously, they're fairly expensive here, and so that definitely carries some risk from that team. We'll look at Cleveland and Oakland here now. Last but not least, now this game is potentially going to get rained out, but if it isn't, then we do have some guys that we do like on Cleveland, because Cleveland is going to have one of the best opportunities to have a solid game here on this entire slate, and they would be very stackable if this game actually plays. Uh, they're not as stackable as the Dodgers or Houston or uh, a couple other teams, but I was going to say Arizona, but they are probably the fourth or fifth best on the slate, and so that gives them some utility. Jose Ramirez and Josh Naylor, and then and Jimenez all have utility. Now those are the 2, 3, and probably 5 spots. I also think that Laureano, who will probably be in the third or fourth spot, will be a viable option today as well. And even in the back of their lineup with Rocio and Brennan, they will have some upside in this one. Quan is interesting, but he's a little bit overpriced for the matchup, so he's probably pretty avoidable. From a home run perspective, I do like Josh Naylor the best from this team, but nobody really jumps off the page here. Bo Naylor for at catcher also has some utility, but he definitely carries some risk with the strikeouts. Obviously, this team doesn't strike out a ton usually, but the back of the lineup does have a little bit riskier there. But the top 3 or 4 guys on the team have good hitting potential on the slate, and so they're very viable. Looking at Oakland here, though, this team is relatively avoidable. Langerlays would probably be the only guy on the team that I think has a lot of home run upside at catcher if he draws a start, and he's dirt cheap, but he definitely carries some risk. Uh, I don't think that he's a great play, but he's not a terrible play either, and so that's what I have for that team. But overall, I think this slate is pretty interesting. We have a lot of games here. I do think that Cleveland Oakland game doesn't play, so to keep that in mind. So to recap here, my pitchers, Kelly, Pavetta, and Kirby are the top 3 overall, with Puck and Allen being contrarian plays, and then Rodon and Harrison being extreme GPP plays. I'm probably borderline on Harrison too, just because he hasn't been particularly great. At the catcher position, our top options are going to be Will Smith, Moriano for Arizona, Bo Naylor for Cleveland if it plays, uh, Cal Raleigh and Mitch Garver both for Seattle. It has some utility as well, but definitely carrying some risks there. Then at first base, we like Otani Freeman, both for the Dodgers, who, of course, Otani can play in outfield. Value play in Bell, another value play in Abreu, and then potentially Naylor. Sorry about that. Sorry about that. Okay, and potentially Naylor at the end for the first base there as a decent play. Not super high risk, but he's still a decent play on that one. For second base, obviously Mookie Betts carries a lot of upside. Gonna be hard to roster him at his price point, but Torres is a great value play for the Yankees in this game. He's gonna have good ownership too, and he's got a high potential. Uh, and then Brandon Lowe has that home run upside, as does Brendan Donovan and Gorman, but they definitely carry a lot of risk in those matchups. Then looking at third base, Berger is going to be my favorite play from Miami from that team. I also like Devers and Jose Ramirez and Bregman, but they're all pretty expensive and can be contrarian to each other. Uh, Machado is also in play. Brian Hayes, Polanco, and Chapman all have some utility today. For the shortstops, Machado is a clear-cut top guy for that position, but Volpe for the Yankees has some utility as a value play, as does Tim Anderson for Miami, and so does Chris Taylor for the Dodgers. And then in outfielders, we have quite a few options. Obviously, expensive options being Soto, Judge, Itani, and Carroll. And then some more value plays would be Gurriel Jr. for Arizona, Duran for Boston, Soler for San Francisco, McCutcheon for Pittsburgh, McCormick for Houston, Quan, Ho Lee for San Francisco, George Springer, Laureano, De La Cruz for Miami as well. So overall, I think it's a pretty good slate. It's going to be a pretty interesting one. Hopefully everybody does well. Thank you guys for liking, commenting, subscribing, and have a nice day, guys.